Is this really happening again? Are we genuinely about to have the same exhausting conversation? The same circular debate that we've been trapped in for what feels like an eternity? Because if there's one thing that defines the Toronto Maple Leafs experience, if there's one constant in this never-ending cycle of hope and heartbreak, it's the absolute refusal to learn from the past. It's the maddening tendency to romanticize mediocrity, to chase ghosts, to convince ourselves that bringing back a familiar face will somehow solve problems that run far deeper than personnel. Michael Bunting. That name keeps echoing through the halls of Scotiabank Arena like a haunting melody that nobody can quite forget. And I understand why. I genuinely do. He was scrappy. He was emotional. He got under opponents' skin. He played with an edge that this franchise has desperately craved for decades. But here's the question that nobody seems willing to ask. The uncomfortable truth that needs to be dragged into the light and examined under the harshest possible scrutiny. If Michael Bunting was truly the missing piece, if he was genuinely that irreplaceable element that separated this team from championship glory, then why did the Maple Leafs let him walk in the first place? Why did management watch him leave without putting up a fight? Why did they allow him to sign elsewhere if he was so fundamentally critical to their success? The answer is simple, brutally simple, and it cuts through all the nostalgia and sentimentality like a knife through warm butter. Michael Bunting is a complimentary player. He is not a difference maker. He is not a game changer. He is not the kind of asset that transforms a playoff contender into a Stanley Cup champion. He is a role player who benefited enormously from playing alongside two generational talents in Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner. He rode their coattails to a career year, inflated his statistics, and then cashed in on a contract that reflected production he has never been able to replicate consistently anywhere else. That's not a criticism of his character or his work ethic. It's simply an acknowledgement of reality, of the cold, hard facts that define his value in today's National Hockey League. Now, let's talk about Matthew Knies for a moment, because this comparison is absolutely critical to understanding why this proposed trade makes zero sense from a strategic standpoint. Knies is 22 years old. He's bigger, stronger, faster, and more physically imposing than Bunting ever was or ever will be. He plays the same net front style, the same gritty, grinding game that Leafs Nation supposedly craves. But he does it with more power, more explosiveness, more raw athletic ability. He's already producing at a comparable rate to Bunting's best season, and he's doing it on an entry-level contract that provides massive financial flexibility. He represents the future of this organization, the kind of young, cost-controlled talent that championship teams build around. So why on earth would Toronto trade assets to bring back an older, more expensive, less physically gifted version of a player they already have on a roster? This is a fundamental flaw in the entire premise of this trade proposal. It's not just misguided, it's actively counterproductive. It's the hockey equivalent of selling your brand new car to buy back the used one you traded in 3 years ago because you have fond memories of the road trips you took in it. Nostalgia is a powerful drug, but it's a terrible foundation for roster construction. It clouds judgment. It distorts reality. It makes organizations do things that feel good emotionally but make absolutely no sense strategically. And then there's a Mattias Nelson side of this equation, which is equally problematic for entirely different reasons. Yes, Nelson has struggled in Toronto. Yes, he's been a healthy scratch for extended periods. Yes, his production has been disappointing relative to expectations. But here's what nobody seems willing to acknowledge. The Maple Leafs acquired Nelson specifically because they believed he had untapped offensive potential, because they saw something in his game that could be developed and maximized in the right system with the right opportunity. They gave up assets to get him. They invested in him. And now, after less than one full season of inconsistent usage and unclear role definition, the solution is to just give up, to cut bait and trade him for a 30-year-old pending free agent who brings nothing to the table that this roster doesn't already have? That's not roster management. That's panic. That's the kind of short-sighted reactionary decision-making that keeps organizations stuck in mediocrity forever. Because here's the uncomfortable truth that Leafs Nation needs to hear. If Nelson goes to Nashville and flourishes, if he rediscovers his offensive touch and becomes a productive middle six forward in a system that actually knows how to use him, this trade will haunt Toronto for years. It will become another cautionary tale, another example of this franchise giving up on young talent too early because they were too impatient, too desperate for immediate gratification, too willing to sacrifice long-term upside for short-term comfort. Let me be absolutely clear about something. The Toronto Maple Leafs do not need Michael Bunting. They do not need another middle six winger who plays with emotion but lacks elite skill. They do not need to spend assets acquiring a player who will be a free agent in 4 months and will almost certainly price himself out of Toronto's budget if he has any kind of successful stint. What they need, what they have needed for years, is defensive stability. They need a legitimate top-four defenseman who can play heavy minutes in all situations, who can shut down elite opposing forwards, who can move the puck efficiently under pressure. That is the glaring hole in this roster. That is the weakness that has been exposed repeatedly in playoff series after playoff series. And this is where the entire conversation should pivot, where the focus should shift from sentimental reunions to strategic necessity. If Brad Treliving is going to make a trade, if he's going to spend assets and take on salary, it should be for Rasmus Andersson, not Michael Bunting. Andersson is 29 years old, in his absolute prime, logging over 24 minutes per night in all situations. He is a proven top-pairing defenseman who can immediately step into Toronto's lineup and stabilize the entire back end. He addresses a critical organizational need. He fits the competitive timeline. And according to multiple reports, he would be willing to sign a long-term extension, which transforms this from a rental situation into a foundational move. Compare that to Michael Bunting, a 30-year-old winger who will cost assets, who carries a significant cap hit, who plays a style that Toronto already has covered with younger, cheaper, more talented players, and who'll be a free agent in a few months with zero guarantee of re-signing. The choice should be obvious. The decision should be easy. But this is the Toronto Maple Leafs we're talking about, an organization with a long and painful history of making emotional decisions instead of logical ones, of prioritizing sentiment over strategy, of choosing comfort over courage. Here's a scenario that should terrify every single person in Leafs Nation. Toronto trades Nelson and a pick for Bunting. Bunting plays well for a few months, generates some positive vibes, reminds everyone why they liked him in the first place. Then he hits free agency in July and signs a 4-year deal worth $6 million per season with a team that has more cap space and fewer internal complications. Meanwhile, Nelson goes to Nashville, gets consistent top 6 minutes, plays on the power play, and suddenly starts producing at the rate Toronto always hoped he would. He becomes a 20-goal, 50-point player on a cost-control contract, while the Leafs are left with nothing but memories and regret. That is not a hypothetical. That is a very real, very plausible outcome. And it's the kind of outcome that should make management think twice, 3 times, 100 times before pulling the trigger on a deal like this. Because the margin for error is razor thin. The window is closing. And every decision, every move, every transaction has to be evaluated not through the lens of nostalgia or emotion, but through the cold, hard calculus of championship probability. Now, I want to address the elephant in the room, the argument that keeps getting repeated in every comment section, every social media thread, every conversation about this potential trade. But Bunting knows the market. He understands the pressure. He's proven he can handle Toronto. And you know what? That's absolutely true. He does know the market. He did handle the pressure reasonably well during his time here. But that doesn't make him irreplaceable. That doesn't make him essential. That doesn't mean he's worth trading assets for when those same assets could be used to acquire a player who actually fills a position of need. This is a trap that Toronto keeps falling into, the same mistake they make over and over again. They prioritize familiarity over functionality. They choose comfort over competence. They convince themselves that bringing back a former player will somehow recapture magic that was never really there in the first place. Michael Bunting had one great season in Toronto, and it was great largely because he was stapled to the hip of Austin Matthews for the majority of the year. Remove that context, remove that deployment, and what you're left with is a solid but unspectacular middle six winger who brings energy and grit but lacks the skill and consistency to be a true difference maker. And let's talk about the financial side of this equation, because that's where this proposal completely falls apart. Michael Bunting carries a cap hit of $3 million. That might not sound like a lot, but in a salary cap world where every dollar matters, where every penny of flexibility can be the difference between making a move and standing pat, $3 million is significant, especially when you consider that Toronto is already tight against the cap, already struggling to manage their financial commitments, already facing difficult decisions about which players to keep and which to let go. If Nashville retains 50% of Bunting's salary, as this proposal suggests, that brings his cap hit down to $1.5 million. That's more manageable, certainly, but it still represents money that could be spent elsewhere, money that could be allocated toward a more impactful acquisition, money that could be saved for a deadline move that actually addresses a position of need. And here's the kicker. Even at $1.5 million, Bunting is only a rental. He's only here for a few months. There's no long-term value. There's no sustained impact. It's a short-term Band-Aid on a wound that requires surgery. Compare that to what Toronto could do with those assets if they were patient, if they were strategic, if they were willing to think beyond the immediate emotional gratification of a reunion tour. They could package Nelson with other pieces and go after a legitimate top-four defenseman. They could use those assets to acquire a player who actually fits a need, who actually makes the team better in a meaningful, measurable way. They could make a move that positions them for sustained success rather than temporary comfort. But instead, the conversation keeps circling back to Michael Bunting, the familiar face, the comfortable choice, the easy decision that requires no courage, no vision, no willingness to think differently. And that, more than anything else, is what frustrates me about this entire discussion. It's not that Bunting is a bad player. He's not. It's not that he wouldn't help in some marginal way. He probably would. It's that this trade represents everything that's wrong with how Toronto has operated for decades. The constant looking backward instead of forward. The prioritization of sentiment over strategy. The refusal to make the difficult, uncomfortable decisions that championship organizations make without hesitation. So here's my question for Leafs Nation, and I want you to really think about this before you answer. Do you want to feel good for a few months? Or do you want to win a Stanley Cup? Because those are two very different goals, and they require two very different approaches. Bringing back Michael Bunting might make you feel nostalgic. It might generate some positive energy in the short term. It might even help the team marginally in certain situations. But it will not, I repeat, will not be the move that transforms this franchise from a perennial playoff disappointment into a championship contender. That move, that transformative acquisition, requires courage. It requires vision. It requires a willingness to pay a real price for a real difference maker. It requires targeting someone like Rasmus Andersson, a player who addresses a critical need, who fits a competitive timeline, who could be signed long-term and become a foundational piece of the defense for the next 5 years. That is the move Brad Treliving should be making. That is the conversation we should be having. Not this endless, exhausting debate about whether to trade assets for a 30-year-old rental winger who brings nothing to the table that this roster doesn't already have. If you believe Toronto should prioritize defensive stability over nostalgic reunions, if you believe this franchise needs to finally learn from its mistakes and make bold, strategic moves instead of comfortable, emotional ones, then let me know in the comments. And if you want to be here for every single moment of this journey, for every decision, every rumor, every move that shapes the future of this franchise, then join this family right now. Because this isn't just about one trade. This is about whether the Toronto Maple Leafs are finally ready to become the organization they've always had the potential to be.